You're listening to 1220 Radio WFWL, the Catfish 99.7 FM, and Magic 95.9 WRJB, Camden, Tennessee. Our time is 7:53.
Good morning and welcome to Dr. Mike Beloga's Operation 7570, a weekly public affairs program that brings together informative and interesting guests with useful and timely information. Operation 7570 has been a Saturday morning tradition for more than 40 years and sponsored as a community service by the Bank of Camden, serving you at locations on the Court Square, West Main Street, and Highway 641 North in Camden, as well as locations in Big Sandy and Brewston. We'll join Mike and his guest after this message from the Bank of Camden.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Guess who? Yep, we're going to start early this morning because I've got a guest that's I've got a lot of questions for this guest, and I think he's going to have a lot of comments that he can share with you. Fact of the matter is, my agenda is so long that I was going to put him into a two-part discussion with another candidate who's running for chancellor, but I decided that the issues were so important to you and the listening audience and to me that I'm going to have this guest come back at a later date. So you're going to be listening to part one. My guest this morning is Dan Kramer. He's a Democrat, and he's running for the candidacy for the 7th Congressional District. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm just fine. Drive down from Clarksville this morning?
Oh, it was a great drive.
Great.
Just to dodge a few thunderstorms, but other than that, it was fine.
Well, going back, you're going to have some more of the same. I've got about 14 issues that I'd like to discuss with you. I believe your comment to a radio interview host about the most important issue to the 7th District was what?
Well, jobs in the economy. It's nothing's changed since back. We've had elections many years all along, and it's always, it's the economy, and that's what's on most people's mind. That's what affects most people's life immediately. That's what our country needs the most right now: is good-paying jobs and a strong economy.
Okay, I'm going to add another word there that I think you answered this question in: job creation. How do you go about creating jobs, Dan?
Okay, well, job creation, and almost as important as job creation right now is we need to change the income inequality that we've got. So as the recession's we've been pulling back from the recession, we're creating jobs, but what we're not creating are the same jobs, the same pays, the same wages that we had before the crash from the Bush era. So in addition to adding jobs, we also have to reduce underemployment. People who are working at below their skill level, below their wage potential, because the good jobs haven't come back to the economy the way they're supposed to. So how do we fix this? Well, first thing we gotta do is the bottom tiers that haven't had a living wage for almost 10 years because minimum wage hasn't kept up with cost of living, that needs to be changed. So we need to start.
Can I interrupt you a little bit?
Absolutely.
I thought jobs was at best a greenfield area, maybe even a brownfield area. You don't think you're going to get the same jobs back that were lost 10 years ago, do you?
No, but we're going to get there are jobs, there's work that needs to be done. People's time, people's efforts, people's education, their skills needs to be compensated fairly. So we're not manufacturing T-shirts anymore because we've sent all that work to China. But it's low-skilled jobs. It's the work of the 50s and the 60s. And our manufacturing base is retracted because we've shifted from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. But that means if we're going to have a service economy, we need to have educated, high-skilled workers doing those service kind of jobs.
Explain what you mean by educated and high-skilled.
All right. So if your business is selling insurance, or if you're going to work in the healthcare industry, then obviously you have to be trained in accounting, or you have to be trained in healthcare, you have to be trained in nursing. So in order to have those jobs, which our economy is depending on, because especially aging population, we need people working in healthcare. We need people working in finances and things like that. Well, that's not usually the skills you come out of high school with. So there's some secondary education that has to go along with that.
Okay. Now, if you're talking about an industrial manufacturer, you got to go back in history and note that we had an industrial revolution. Henry Ford started building cars, and that was a revolution when he did it on a line. And then we had another revolution. And I want to call this maybe the computer revolution.
Information revolution, yeah.
Yeah. And that changed everything. You know what industry is looking for right now? They don't want PhD engineers. They don't want even master degree engineers, or maybe even bachelor degree engineers. You know what they want? They want a secondary school educated mechanic who can operate their line.
Of course, our economy's got jobs across the spectrum of education. But you're right. Right now, the big gap we've got is in skilled trades.
14%.
So,
for advanced degrees.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're in high school now and you're thinking, what am I going to do when I get out? The bang for your buck. Go to a well-established, credentialed place and learn to be an auto mechanic, because every auto mechanic dealer, every dealer in the Tennessee and the 7th District is short skilled mechanics. And they make good money, right? And everybody needs good mechanics. And if you're an auto mechanic, your job is not getting outsourced, because guess what? People drive their cars in the United States. We're not shipping our cars to China to get them fixed and have it come back later, parcel post. So.
Okay. As a candidate for the 7th District, do you have an incipient idea of how this training would go and what part you would play in it?
Well, okay, in general, education policy is generally left up to the states. So the federal government is involved in some respects to it. I think Tennessee's on the right track, where they have a lottery. They use the lottery scholarships to encourage post-education, and now that's being expanded to not only mean 4-year degrees. But again, you asked me a question earlier, and we didn't finish answering the question.
Go ahead.
How do we fix underemployment and unemployment? So, first thing, like I said, the minimum wage. The minimum wage has to be a living wage. If you want to call a wage the minimum, then it has to be the minimum amount of money somebody earns to survive. So if somebody goes to work 40 hours a week, does their job, and comes home, they shouldn't end up $200 in debt after they pay their rent, their light, and eat. Because if they are, then they aren't being paid the minimum. So that's the first step, a living minimum wage. Well, not really the first, but one of the steps. Another is infrastructure investment for at least 10 years, especially during the economy drawdown. The idea is, the economy's shrinking, less tax revenue, so we have to cut spending. And what are we cutting spending on? We're cutting spending on repair and inspection of bridges, repair of our roadways. We're not spending money on the power grid. So as our infrastructure is deteriorating and shrinking, it's making it harder and harder for our businesses to compete, because they don't have the roads they need to move their equipment. Here in Benton County, if a factory wanted to come into Camden and take advantage of what industrial infrastructure there already is with the rail and stuff from the other factories here, they'd have to compete on roads that are in disrepair. You have to start worrying about whether the bridges are going to be closed. Tennessee has 2 of the most under-inspected bridges in the nation. It's on the large list. So again, that federal spending on infrastructure is what motivates the economy to do well. And when you spend money on infrastructure, again, it's not something that anybody could send out to China to get done cheaper. So it has to be Americans doing the job, because the work is here. And then you get immigration reform. If you have a huge undocumented worker population that's working off the books because they are illegal and undocumented, that's a pressure on wages down. Because although people aren't supposed to do it, they can hire labor cheaper illegally, and that leaves people who are in the workforce out of a job. So if however you want to reform the situation. If the people who are here if they decide we need them as workers, especially for migrant farm workers and stuff like that, if they become documented or legal or whatever you want to call it, as soon as there's a system where they are no longer afraid of being deported because they're here illegally or undocumented, then they have the power in their own work then to not be in fear and not to accept dollar an hour wages and things like that. And once you take away the underemployed or the below minimum wage jobs, then that brings wage pressures up on everybody.
All right. Don't we have that system in place, though? Surely you know what a green card is, don't you?
Absolutely.
Tell me what a green card is.
Well, they're not green anymore, but they're a permanent resident visa is what it technically is, yeah.
Okay. And how does that system work?
Well, anybody who's here legally in the country who's not a citizen yet has a visa that allows them permanent residency.
Well, can't a migrant farmer apply for one of these visas?
Absolutely.
And have access to the United States to work?
Sure, but there's lotteries and not everybody, obviously there's a limitation on immigration set by federal policy. But we know that there is more work that Americans or Native Americans or whatever you want to call them aren't going to do. Migrant farm work is not a job that most Americans are willing to do because it involves being away from home for 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time. It's not particularly pleasant work. So there are people who are good at the work, who want to do the work, and they are already here doing the work. But as long as they're undocumented, they can be paid whatever the farmer wants to because he knows they can't complain. So that means he doesn't have to hire anybody at a higher rate because he can always find. So, as an example, I had a gentleman talk to me at a Constitution rally in Wayne County, and he said, "Well, I used to be a roofer, but all the other roofers in town hired illegal workers, so I could never compete on prices, so I stopped being a roofer." Well, if all those people who were undocumented, either if they were gone or if they were documented, where if you gave them some opportunity to work in the States for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, some temporary worker pass, well, once they become legally able to work, then you can't hire them cheaper than anybody else. And then the other guy doesn't have to compete against somebody who's got
Which
cheap
brings
labor.
me to the question, how does value enter into determination of compensation?
How does value enter into...
Yeah, worker value.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, my question is, why do you insist on a minimum wage when compensation should depend upon the value that person has in performing the job?
Absolutely. I see what you're saying. Okay. If you allow the employer to decide absolutely every aspect of value, then when there is a surplus of labor, nobody gets paid. And this is what we saw during the Great Depression. You can see it in movies, Cinderella Man, right? So everybody shows up to the dock to work. I need 5 guys. I'm only going to pay 50 cents. You don't like it, then I got 200 other guys who'll take your job. Well, if there's a surplus of labor, when you have like a shrunk economy, like we did after 2009, when the economy crashed, then the employer gets all the power, and that's all right, except that then when the employer can pay whatever low wage he wants, then your consumers have no money. When the consumers have no money, they can't pay their taxes, or their taxes go down because they're making less. They buy less products, and because we live in a service and retail economy, then the rest of the economy suffers because there's no purchase power. When there's no purchase power, Walmart says, well, I got to cut staff because I'm not selling as much. Then there's more, and it becomes a cycle in a downward trend. On the other hand, if you say, well, you can't pay someone less than it takes to live, in this case, we'd have to up everyone to about $12 an hour, which is even above what the $10 they're talking about. Well, now 47 million people all of a sudden just got a 20% pay raise. And these are not people who are going to stash their money in the Cayman Islands. They're going to take that 20%, and they're going to immediately walk in, and they're going to buy food with it. They're going to buy clothes with it. They're going to buy gas for their car with it. Now all these retailers are going to going to see an increase. Well, now they have to put on more staff. So it becomes a spiral in the opposite direction, and it grows the economy. And as long as we have a service retail-based economy, austerity measures like we saw in Greece, where you just cut spending and cut worker wages, it's self-defeating, because it cuts your tax base, it cuts cuts the engine that your economy is running on. So I would counter that. We say, well, why would you need a minimum wage at all? Why don't we just let the market decide? Well, if that's the case, why not just say pay everyone $1 an hour? Well, because then we know what happens then. You end up with economic slavery. Nobody has the power to change jobs or move jobs, or the confidence or the financial ability to look for a better job, because they're always scared that at any moment somebody else will come in and take their job for 10 cents less on the hour. So if you want to let Walmart pick the minimum wage, that's the way to go. You'll get $1 an hour. Everybody will get $1 an hour. But if you let Walmart hire, the largest retailer in the country, if you want to let Walmart receive $900,000 a year per store, that's almost $1 million per store of government money going to its workers to pay food stamps, to pay healthcare subsidies, all this stuff to just keep their workers alive. That's $1 million of taxpayer money per Walmart store. And then Walmart walks away with hundreds of billions of dollars in profit. Well, we're subsidizing Walmart. So if Walmart would just pay their workers enough where they didn't have to be on the government subsidies, and what would happen? Walmart's profits would go down a little bit. And what would happen if Walmart's profits go down? Well, they wouldn't have enough lobbyists. They would have to cut probably some of their lobbyist staff, which are lobbying to keep wages low so that they don't, So we as taxpayers are subsidizing large retailers, large corporations who want to keep wages low because it helps their profits. And when you hear a Republican talk about whatever you're doing, it's going to hurt jobs. When they say it hurts jobs, it's like a fortune cookie game. You can just replace it automatically with, if they say it hurts jobs, it means it hurts profits. And they're talking about their profits, not our profits.
Okay. Is there any recourse that the federal government has when they keep track of the subsidy that they're paying to the workers in this Walmart store?
Well, in a perfect world, that's the legislation we need passed.
What about Henry Ford? He had a business philosophy, that everyone who worked in his factory should be able to afford to purchase a Ford car.
Well, there you go. Exactly. I mean, and there's a story of when they started putting in robots into factories, and one of the Ford descendants was walking through with. Now I probably got the story wrong, but the analogy is correct. So the corporate owner and the union guy are walking through the factory, and the robots are there, and one guy goes, "Yeah, how's your union going to do when all your workers are replaced by robots?" He goes, "Well, how's your factory going to do when your robots try and buy cars?" So. It's kind of a two-way street there. The production, retail, they all depend on having a customer for it, especially in our economy now where it's very consumer-driven.
Yeah. See, that's why I asked you the question earlier about value added from the worker himself or herself. And the value added from a robot, I think you can very quickly understand what that value is, even though robots don't buy the products that they're making.
Absolutely, but and that's where the minimum wage disparity has come in. Our technology has allowed us with robotics and things like that.
Don't we have a changing paradigm, though?
Of course.
And the changing paradigm with respect to a work week. Why a 40-hour work week? Why a 40-hour work week?
Would you like more or less?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
I'm not sure what your question is.
Value added.
Okay.
You're placing value on minimum wage and a 40-hour work week. And I don't know if that paradigm really exists anymore.
Absolutely not. I believe most people do work that is well beyond the value of minimum wage. I believe that most people should be paid far more. In fact, most people are. But at the bottom of our economy, a larger and larger proportion of people are ending up in unskilled jobs. And sadly, there are people who graduate from college who can't get jobs because our economy hasn't grown enough to support those higher paying jobs, and all they got left is to work at Starbucks. And this kind of feeds into immigration reform. We got a policy right now where they want to expand H-1B visas. I think that's the right letters. So they say, okay, we got people coming over here from other countries. They come to our universities. That's America's big draw right now, is our higher education. People around the world want an American education. They stay for master's degrees, PhDs. So then we're saying we should give them a visa. We should keep them here. Well, except that those people, again, because they'll work for half what a corporation can pay them half what they could pay an American, because they're still making 3 times what they could make if they went back home. We're encouraging, again, another downward wage pressure, and now it's at the high end of the spectrum, not even at the Walmarts and the McDonald's. So now we're actually putting wage pressure on PhDs, masters, engineers. So, and you hear Google and Microsoft saying, oh, we don't have enough skilled people, we don't have enough trained people, we need these visas to keep more people coming in. What they're really saying is, we don't want to pay people more. Because if you want a computer engineer in this country, you can find as many as you want any day of the week. You go down to a Starbucks, half the baristas there are unemployed software engineers. And rather than retraining them to the current standard, they try to take a guy out of university who will work for less because he's here on an H-1B visa that we've encouraged the government to give them.
Okay, we've got about, maybe 5 minutes that I'd like to open the door to the health care issue. And I know what you're going to tell me,
Okay.
and you may have to go and do it for our listening audience. 19 states have rejected their fiscal responsibility to expand Medicaid. If Tennessee were to expand Medicaid by executive decision of the governor,
Yes.
TennCare would increase from 1.6 million insured to approximately 2 million insured, another 330,000. Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey is attempting to steal executive privilege from Haslam because he's afraid Haslam is going to feel the pressure and assume the expansion of Medicare. Now, here's what Tennessee is losing. $4.2 billion over a 3-year period. $1.4 billion a year for 3 years. That would take care of all 2 million TennCare insured recipients. After that, the number would drop down to the federal government taking care of 90% of the health care costs for Tennessee.
What's your question?
The question is, why should the people of Tennessee not demand that their leaders,
exactly.
their legislature, their governor,
Yep.
they should demand that?
Well, I'm going to tell you why I don't know why they're not. Well, I have some suspicion why they're not. I suspect that a lot of people are not really understanding what's in the Affordable Care Act, and they're listening to people who have an ideology and have an agenda and are pushing their buttons to tell them that there's a problem with it, when in fact the Affordable Care Act is working. More people have signed up than they expected. 90% of them have paid their bills, in spite of what Fox News reported. They picked stats that were 2 weeks before the filing deadlines were due. And states that aren't expanding Medicaid are leaving a huge portion of their population, the working poor. These are people who are not sitting at home eating Cheetos collecting subsidies. These are working people. These are the people who are working at minimum wage that isn't minimum. They're going to work every day and they aren't able to afford health care, and they're the ones falling through the gap. So the people who need the help, doing the right thing, they're the ones getting left out in the cold. And in Tennessee especially, that's like I said, $1.4 billion a year. That's $1.4 billion that could be coming to Tennessee, that could be paying Tennessee nurses, could be buying infrastructure in Tennessee hospitals, could be going into the profits of Tennessee corporations that run our hospitals, like Community Health Care and stuff like that. So instead of us closing rural hospitals, as they did in Western Tennessee, and that's coming soon to Middle Western Tennessee. Instead of closing hospitals because they don't have enough people to customers with Medicaid, we'd be expanding them. We'd have communities that had hospitals. When you have communities that have hospitals and you fix the infrastructure, then businesses want to come to your community. If you have no hospital, you have no good roads, nobody's going to come to your community. And then you go, why are all my jobs gone? Why has nobody? It all feeds into each other. The Affordable Care Act is the most transformative legislation this country has seen in decades, to not allow millions of people access to health care. I mean, it's in the Declaration of Independence. We humans are given the rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Well, what the heck is life? If you can't see a doctor for your illnesses, then you're being denied life. It's right there. It's the founding document of our country, and we're ignoring it for the ideology because we don't like the guy's politics in the White House.
Dan, I've got to invite you back.
No problem.
I've got about another at least 10 issues that I'd like to discuss with you. You're an interesting conversationalist. You're drawing the right conclusions.
Well, I'm drawing the same as you. I'm not going to, obviously, if I want 100%, if I want somebody who's agreeing with 100% of the time, I got to look at the mirror. And that's true of everybody. So I understand that not everybody's going to like everything I say.